Hello, everyone. How's it going? Can everybody hear me okay? It's been a bit. I have no idea whether or not my settings work. All right. At least one person is here to say hello and can hear me. I know that this was short notice. I didn't let anybody know that I was going to be doing this ahead of time, but of course, the month that I decide to take off, a massive historiographical snafu engulfs the highest levels of government, and of course, I wasn't there to talk about it, so I couldn't wait. I was thinking about doing this lecture later in the month, but I had to get to it while it was fresh. There's a lot going on today. So if you're distracted like I am, I understand. I definitely am not sure I'm going to be able to bring my A game to this because our commander in chief has contracted COVID-19 and last I checked was being rushed to Walter Reed Hospital. Making it difficult to focus on this other thing that he did, but I really want to talk about the 1619 project because it's really interesting to me, and it's really interesting for a lot of reasons. I hope you're all ready for a little bit of inside baseball, where I talk about some of the, I guess, really like niche internal arguments that historians have with each other. And normally I wouldn't subject you to this, but I'm going to because because apparently Donald Trump decided to make a thing of it. So we're going to talk about it, and I'm super excited to do so. So everybody, buckle up, and let's get ready for this. And I'm actually going to grab a little bit of water. I'll be right back. So everyone sit tight for 10 seconds. All right. So the 1619 project uh, was among other things. Well, actually, specifically, what it is it's an initiative, a project, a some kind of historical journalistic publication by the New York Times Magazine. It came out initially in August of 2019, celebrating, or I guess commemorating, the 400th anniversary of the beginning of American slavery. 400 years since 1619, when the first group of enslaved Africans arrived on the shores of colonial America. And it explicitly, according to their own literature, wants to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of black Americans at the very center of the national narrative. Sounds, pretty innocuous on first blush. And it really, I would love to go into much greater detail about like what's actually in it and talk about each of the essays, but I'm afraid I don't have time. It's really good, and I want to encourage you, if you're at all interested, to read it because it's quite accessible and it covers a lot of topics that are relevant and interesting and important to me, and I think very critically important to the history of the United States. But it contains a handful of essays that cover a variety of topics relating to specifically black Americans and slavery. Some key ones are one by Matthew Desmond, which places American slavery in a specific frame with regards to American capitalism and how they are sort of dependent upon each other. And then there's another excellent one by Khalil Gibran Muhammad about sugar and the relationship of that commodity to American slavery. You should read that. If you're interested in the relationship between certain commodities and capitalism and early empire and the growth of the American economy, definitely read that. Read Sugar Sweetness and Power by Sidney Mintz. And then there's a handful of other essays, ones that talk about how there's one by Linda Villarosa that talks about how perceptions of black people's pain tolerance has affected the medical profession and the way that we treat black Americans in our hospitals. There's one by Brian Stevenson on the racial origins of mass incarceration, one on the wealth gap. There's a podcast. There's a handful of poems, and there's one on the healthcare system. And these all sort of frame these modern American issues in terms relating to American slavery. And they do a pretty good job of doing that. They're interesting essays. They're well written. They're well researched. If you had asked me when I read this when it first came out, I thought it was great. I'm a big nerd, though. If you'd asked me if I thought anyone was going to care about this, I would have told you no, because they're good and they're interesting, but also there's nothing really groundbreaking about any of these essays, and they're not. These are journalists who have done good work, but they're not historians. They're not breaking any new ground. They're incorporating history that's already been written with sort of narrative journalistic storytelling. It's a great project. It's a really good way to learn about the issue, and as part of the 1619 project, they include a curriculum, a suggestion of ways that teachers can use this in their classrooms if they so desire. It's just a very simple document suggesting how to incorporate it into your existing social studies or American history classes. Again, to me, not super alarming. I forgot why I chose this picture for the second slide, but pretend like I know what I'm doing. Just Cotton Avenue. It's also a really great visual essay. There's a photo essay, and there's lots of really great photography that accompanies it. So definitely check it out. I'm going to tell you about all the things going on around it, but I really, it'll take you not that long. Read the 1619 Project for yourself. Come to your own conclusions. Of particular interest, though, to me and to everybody else, is the introductory essay written by Nicole Hannah-Jones, this woman here, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, a MacArthur Fellow, all around a pretty impressive woman. And she writes an essay on the idea of America, which talks about voting. It talks about her father serving in the military to try to sort of earn American citizenship as a black man, and the incomplete sort of promise of democracy as it exists in America. Well, I'll tell you what to think. I'm just saying, I have to say, I'm obliged to say that you should come to your conclusions on your own. You don't have to. I just have to say that you're going to do it. So, anyway, Nicole Hannah-Jones, she writes an essay on democracy, specifically on voting, on the origins of the American system. Again, nothing particularly groundbreaking here. Again, to me, I read this, nothing stuck out. And you're gonna see. We got to get into some different mindsets to really understand what happened here. But I read this and I was like, whatever. She does have a section on slavery, right? Which is, among other things, and I'm going to read this statement in full because this is kind of the crux of all of it. But this is the center of her essay. It's well written. It's interesting. But she says, conveniently left out of our founding mythology is the fact that one of the primary reasons some of the colonists decided to declare their independence from Britain was because they wanted to protect the institution of slavery. By 1776, Britain had grown deeply conflicted over its role in the barbaric institution that had reshaped the Western Hemisphere. In London, there were growing calls to abolish the slave trade. This would have upended the economy of the colonies, in both the North and the South. The wealth and prominence that allowed Jefferson, at just 33, and the other founding fathers to believe that they could successfully break off from one of the mightiest empires in the world came from the dizzying profits generated by chattel slavery. In other words, we may never have revolted against Britain if some of the founders had not understood that slavery empowered them to do so, nor if they had not believed that independence was required in order for them to ensure that slavery would continue. It is not incidental that 10 of this nation's first 12 presidents were enslavers, and some might argue that this nation was founded not as a democracy, but as a slaveocracy. So, this, I think, is a perfectly defensible statement. It is controversial. It is bold. It is possibly more aggressive than most historians would choose to be. But I don't think there is anything inherently untrue about this. But we'll talk about... I'll come back at the end to sort of like what historians believe about this. But almost immediately, there was a backlash. There was some controversy regarding the 1619 Project. And the first came from a professor, Sean Willents, professor of American history at Princeton, who called the work cynical and published the essay that you see there, disagreeing with the 1619 Project, saying that it diminishes the role of abolitionists in founding of America and the way that that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution actually provided for anti-slavery and for the eventual abolition of slavery. But Willents doesn't stop there. No, he's not satisfied with just writing an essay. No, he gathers together a group of other American historians, 4 of them, to sign a letter, strongly worded letter, to the New York Times, disagreeing with the premise of the 1619 Project and saying that it needs to be heavily revised. You don't need to know who any of these people are. It doesn't matter. However, interestingly, one of them is James Oakes, and Oakes is a Marxist historian, a leftist, and published some criticisms of his own on the World Socialist website. And what's interesting about this is that it allows the critics of the 1619 Project to say, oh, look, this 1619 Project is being opposed from both the left and the right. It is wrong in both directions. And that is technically correct. This letter was circulated to a lot more historians, and they did not sign it. And because they correctly determined that the point of the essay the letter was not to correct and revise and improve the 1619 Project, it was to diminish and discredit the entire project itself. I need to remind you at this point, and I'm going to continue to remind you, that there are a dozen other essays that have nothing to do with Nicole Hannah-Jones's assertion, right? They're very well supported essays about prisons, about commodities, about capitalism, about the healthcare system, about all sorts of things that have nothing to do, right, with this specific criticism, which is that Nicole Hannah-Jones's statement about the origins of the American Revolution goes a little bit too far. One of the fact checkers, Leslie Harris, who's a professor of history at Northwestern, writes an op-ed for the New York Times where she says, I objected to the statement. I told them to change it, and they didn't. However, she also in that same essay says, the reason why I objected was because I thought that it would make it easier to criticize this project. Not because the project itself is flawed, but that she was worried that somebody would take this statement by Nicole Hannah-Jones about the origins of American democracy and about the American Revolution and use it to do exactly what they did, which is attack the entire project itself. In that same objection, Harris says, overall, the 1619 Project is a much-needed corrective to the blindly celebratory histories that once dominated our understanding of the past. Histories that wrongly suggested racism and slavery were not a central part of U.S. history. So, this is super boring. Nobody cares about any of this. This is just historians arguing with each other. It's centrist and traditional and conservative historians disagreeing with slightly more radical and in my opinion, ambitious, interesting historians who want to say more about the past than they are. I don't think there is any value in clinging to, our stodgy histories that celebrate America as uniquely, enlightened or democratic or, liberal country, because I don't believe that we were or are. And I don't know that that's defensible. And so I think that these sorts of projects are good and that we need to examine the origins of the revolution and that we need to talk about the motivations of the founding fathers. And while I think that it is true that you can criticize Nicole Hannah-Jones's original statement because the founding fathers did not explicitly cite slavery as their reason for breaking off from Britain, I do think that there is a truth to that. I am not in any fights with historians right now. I have been in fights with, and this is very. I'm using historians very generously at the moment about stuff like this. About one thing that I have argued with a lot with people on the internet. Is whether or not there were any black people in Europe in the Middle Ages. And I guess I should probably do a talk on that at some point, but no, I am not currently arguing with any historians. That is until one of them finds my channel and comes here to argue with me. Anyway, so at this point, this is mostly just a bickering between historians. I think that there's also an element of professional jealousy here. It is far beyond the purview of most historians to be published in the New York Times Magazine. And so I'm trying not to be cynical, but quite honestly, I believe that some of these historians are upset that other non-historians got a greater pride of place than they did and got to sort of get a big, shiny cover story about the origins of American institutions. That's cynical, but I believe that that's probably the case. Again, there's nothing really all that out of place about these statements. These are, entirely uncontroversial when it comes to like existing histories. It's just these just would not raise any eyebrows, but because it was in the New York Times Magazine, interesting things started to happen. So this is when it gets really exciting. So the controversy sort of gets beyond academia here, and this is when it gets really weird and wild. So thus far, it's mostly historians. Some of them are. This was published in the New York Review of Books. These are decently well circulated magazines, but nobody is really like taking off. But the greater conservative infosphere gets a hold of this around this point. And a whole slew of articles start to be published in places like Breitbart, Fox News, the Wall Street Journal. I have decided to include the whole masthead for the Wall Street Journal opinion page because I think it's really funny. Look, my pillow. Sorry, it's purple. I apologize. It's not my pillow. It's a different grifty pillow brand. They hate Greta Thunberg, and they hate when people talk about racism. So all these conservative articles come out where they just rail on the 1619 Project without really talking about what's actually in it. They're mostly just saying, look, it's been criticized by all of these people, including left-wing historians. The liberal New York Times Magazine is talking about race, and they're the real racists. Am I right? And at this point, Andrew Sullivan, who is in certain spheres a lauded conservative thinker, which he should not be. He's a fucking idiot. And our entire, intellectual community is just like full of just some of the dumbest, worst, dullest people in the world who haven't had a new idea in 30 years. Anyway, a bunch of these people come out and they write these, these opinion pieces talking about how the 1619 Project goes too far. It's trying to revise history. It's trying to indoctrinate our children. Liberal ideas, blah, 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 blah. It really takes off. And this, oh man, this is just, to me, just the wildest thing. It expands from where it frankly belongs, which is a minor historiographic quibble between historians about the accuracy of one statement, and it becomes sort of a referendum on talking about race in America entirely. And the the opening salvo is when Tom Cotton, dead-eyed psychopath Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas, Alabama. I apologize. I can't remember where the hell Tom Cotton is from. Anyway, introduces a bill. I'm sorry. This is just the funniest fucking thing to me. Called the Saving American History Act of 2020, which prohibits federal funds from being used to any school that teaches the 1619 Project curriculum in elementary schools. Which, again, when we're talking about the curriculum, it's just like a set of guidelines for students who want, or teachers who want to incorporate it. It's not really anything. I don't know. But as part of introducing this act, he calls the 1619 Project a racially divisive, revisionist account of history that denies the noble principles of freedom and equality on which our nation was founded. He also adds that not a single cent of federal funding should go to indoctrinate young Americans with this left-wing garbage. I do not know the current status of the Saving American History Act. I suspect that it probably is languishing somewhere and will never get passed. This is pure theater by Tom motherfucking Cotton trying to show his conservative bona fides to whatever brain-dead chud gets excited about this sort of thing. But it's pretty fucking funny to me that they decided to call out a history project in Congress. They're specifically so mad about the 1619 Project, which, again, is just like a tepid series of essays stating things that are almost unequivocally true, like entirely provable, just interesting, well-written, but otherwise totally run-of-the-mill historical observations about American history. But we're not done yet because following up on Tom Cotton's Saving American History Act bill, our big, beautiful president gave a press conference on September 17th, where he specifically targeted the 1619 Project, called it ideological poison that will dissolve the civic bonds of America. He attacked left-wing indoctrination and attacked the 1619 Project, claiming that it viewed every issue through the lens of race in an effort to impose tyranny and a new segregation. Remember, if you talk about race, if you think race is a problem in America and that something should be done about it, you, friends, are the real segregationists. Remember, because racism is solved, and if you keep talking about it, you're the real segregationist. So, as part of this, Trump proposes a patriotic education act, or a grant, award, something that's supposed to be awarded by the National Institute of the Humanities, to promote a pro-American curriculum that celebrates the truth about our nation's great history. He also says that he will sign an executive order establishing a commission to promote patriotic education that will be called the 1776 Commission. This is not the only counter project to the 1619 Project. The Federalist, which is a conservative rag, and nobody knows who funds it, also proposed a 1620 project, celebrating the arrival of the Pilgrims or whatever. All intended to contrast with the 1619 Project's explicitly racial view of American history. I want to point out, not that it matters or anybody cares, but Trump can't do this. The federal government has no control over what states teach. And frankly, the most powerful people or body when it comes to what is taught in American schools is the Texas Textbook Commission. They decide what textbooks get published and what's in them. And they, frankly, in terms of deciding curriculum, have more power than anybody in the country, including Donald Trump. But that's okay. This wasn't really intended to do anything. It was just to show that he knew what was going on. I don't know. I'll talk about what this is really about, but this to me is hilarious. Donald Trump mentions critical race theory and all sorts of shit in this speech, which is just absolutely bewildering to me. Trump doesn't know about any of this shit. He hasn't read the 1619 Project. He doesn't know about any of these things. Nobody knows what's in this series of essays. They're just like attacking this the idea of them, the idea of discussing race on its own. The 1619 Project has become this insane sort of effigy for conservative attacks on liberal education, on social justice and critical race theory. During the impeachment hearings, Trump's lawyer mentioned critical race theory. It's just absolutely the most bonkers thing in the world. It's just, to me, I mean, this is... I understand why it's happening, but it's just so wild to me that this is like where it has ended up being focused upon. So like this thing that they keep mentioning, critical race theory. What is critical race theory? Well, I mean, critical race theory began as a movement in sort of legal academia that was intended to use multidisciplinary approaches to examine and challenge the ways in which legal discourse sort of failed to examine racial inequities and promoted racist power dynamics. It was thoroughly rebuked and marginalized by the legal academic majority, and frankly, whether it deserved to or not, ended up not really having any tangible or long-term, material impacts. It was largely, its proponents were shut out from the halls of power. The concept has kind of reemerged as just a catch-all term for any analysis
of social and historical conditions that produce racist outcomes. So all of history, basically. Basically everything that historians have done in the past 40 years, 50 years maybe, to kind of examine the way that race and power interact is now just sort of under this big umbrella of critical race theory. And it, by itself, this idea is completely meaningless. It does, there are adherents and there are books written by this, and there are scholars and intellectuals who call themselves or think of themselves as critical race theorists or work in critical race theory. But when Fox News and Donald Trump and Tom Cotton say critical race theory, that's not what they're talking about. They have not read the works of Kimberly Crenshaw. They don't know about any of this stuff, and they don't care. What they mean when they say critical race theory is saying sometimes structures can be racist, or institutions can be racist, or the outcomes of our structures and our institutions can be racist, and we should do something about that. That is essentially the idea that opponents of the 1619 Project are responding to, is the very suggestion that there might be something racist about America, or about the things that we do, or about the structures that we have built. And if there's any way that black people or minorities are being failed or failing to live up to the ideals of America, or being served, it is something else to do than with our structures. Franz, if you read my long newsletter today, you would know that I don't hate America. I love America. I just want America to be better. Sorry, Genghis Kondo. I called out your real name. Genghis Kondo. I love America. I just want America to be better. Another good example of this sort of like brain poison is cultural Marxism, which is a term that Fox News and alt-right and other people use all the time, which is also deeply rooted in anti-Semitism, but doesn't really mean anything. It's just the idea that there are Marxists who hate America, and they express their hate by criticizing it and pointing out racism, sexism, misogyny, whatever. So what's going on here is what I like to call Fox News brain. And this to me is so fucking funny. Because when Trump gets up and he talks about the 1619 Project and critical race theory, and he talks about indoctrinating children and left-wing whatever, nobody knows what he's talking about. You have to spend all of your time on fucking Fox News to have any idea what the fuck any of this is. I know what he's referring to, and I had to work backwards from his like public statements to try to figure out what exactly it is that he was mad about. And somebody who's not me, who has patience, can absolutely probably go through whatever was on Fox News that day or a week before or a month before and realize that Trump is responding to that, or one of his handlers was like, oh, we got to do something about the 1619 Project. Let's save American education. Or, Antifa is tearing down statues and it's because of the 1619 Project or whatever. And I don't really have anything good or useful to say about that. There's definitely like an alternative to Fox News brain, which is like Russia brain or MSNBC brain, where, I have to hear about Colonel Vindman or, some whoever, third tier foreign policy who got a briefing from some Ukrainian official in, 2016, and that's going to bring down Donald Trump. So this is definitely like a brain poison that is produced by cable news, but I can only sort of speak to this like insane weirdness which comes from spending too much time on Fox News. And it is horrifying that the president of the United States is so deeply entrenched in the sort of conservative infosphere that when he talks about these things, nobody knows what he's talking about unless they are also spending all of their time on Fox News or Breitbart or whatever. But ultimately, right, the 1619 Project itself is a perfectly good attempt to sort of reconcile our national myths with a better and more truthful accounting of what happened at the nation's founding. The specific criticisms are that that Nicole Hannah-Jones's essay goes a little bit too far, and there is an argument to be made that the American Revolution complicated the issue of slavery. It didn't protect it, whether or not the founders intended that, and so it's not perhaps entirely true to say that the founders declared independence because of their desire to protect slavery. But even though it may not have been in their founding documents, I think it's quite defensible to say that there was a fear that the slave state that they had created was under threat by growing abolitionist movements there and in England. And the Marxist criticism, the leftist criticism, is that this sort of centers race in a way that ignores the material components of American history, that ignores sort of the cross-racial dimensions of the working class. I find these criticisms to be somewhat valid, but truthfully, the position of race in America is a unique one, and it deserves to be centered and placed at an important position, especially when discussing the founding. And quite frankly, I think that it is correct to think about 1619 as the founding of sort of the American project as much as 1776. So to 1877 or any number of other dates. Because whether you like it or not, this country's wealth, this country's infrastructure, this country's entire society was built upon the institution of slavery. And whether or not you think that was intentional by the founders, whether or not you think we've done enough to push back against that, I don't think that it's really arguable that the arrival of slaves and the growth of the slave state in the late the 17th and 18th centuries is a critical part of American history, the critical part of American history. So I hope that this was helpful in some way or another. I know that this was a little bit different than my regular talks, but to me, this is so funny to me. This is just such like Fox News brain. Like, it doesn't make any sense to anybody. This is, Donald Trump heard about the 1619 Project through like 10 degrees of telephone. He doesn't know what it is. He just knows that it's got liberals like it or whatever. And the New York Times magazine is a liberal rag. And so it's just bonkers. Let's see. I don't think you need to be angry at all about this because nothing's going to happen. This is why I think it's funny. I mean, I think it's like scary and dangerous for the president to be talking about political indoctrination, but he can't do anything. And frankly, our historical education is already so bad that he couldn't possibly make it worse. So, if me as a historian, I'm laughing, you should be laughing. We should all be laughing together. Maybe I'm jokerfied, but I think it's pretty funny. Karate Chop Whiskey, I do think that, I would say, okay, so capitalism is founded on, Marx would say, primitive accumulation, right? The existence of sort of the capital form depends on the acquisition of raw materials in a primitive accumulation. And I can talk about that in greater detail, and I'm going to get it wrong. But the point is that without sort of a period of exploitation and acquisition, whether that is just literally stealing resources from less developed parts of the world, or something like slavery, or something like I talked about previously, the enclosure of the commons, capitalism cannot exist, right? The growth required by capitalism to function is unsustainable without that primitive accumulation. And so this is me being charitable for no reason, but you can have capitalism without slavery, but it's really just slavery with extra steps. So it is kind of hard to imagine the present form of capital having come into existence without slavery. Other countries did different things. By the way, this is not super important. Well, it is important. I can talk about this more later at a different lecture, but like Britain loves to celebrate itself for abolishing slavery, but it continued to buy commodities from the United States and other slave nations. So all it did was remove itself specifically from the slave trade. So I don't know that they get any fucking cookies for that, but they did abolish slavery earlier in the United States. And this is sort of the point of it, right? Is like, even like, quite frankly, right now, in places like Qatar and the UAE and Indonesia and all over the world, there are slaves or people who may as well be slaves, indentured servants, producing our shit, palm oil and cocoa and rare earth metals and all these things. You can try to buy ethically, and I'm not here to like make you feel bad about purchasing things, because we all gotta purchase things. But the truth is that capitalism depends upon exploitation, right? It is an exploitative system. It can't function without extracting wealth. And that means either workers not being paid for their labor, or being paid adequately for their labor, or just pure extraction of raw materials. And you know what my opinions are on that. There may be a way to conceive of a capitalism that is substantially less exploitative and cruel. It will never be entirely free of cruelty and exploitation. But right now, we're not even really trying, right? We've just sort of like pushed that exploitation to the margins. And to answer Genghis Khan's question from earlier, it doesn't make me, I'm not mad, right? I'm not, I am mad. I'm mad all the time. But like, you shouldn't feel threatened or upset or angry at the suggestion that America was founded on slave ideals, right? That it wasn't the shining city on the hill, because you are not America. You are not Thomas Jefferson, right? You can decide for yourself what you want this country to be. And if you don't want it to be a slave state, if you don't want it to cling to the outdated structures of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence that have a lot of good in them but failed to meet their promises, that's okay. That's fine. You can do that. We can decide as individuals, as a people, that we want the country to be better. And we don't have to, there's this perception that this is all like liberal guilt, right? That we're flagellating ourselves by discussing, how bad America is and how bad we are. And like, I don't know, some people might feel that way, but like, that's not the point. The point is not to, to sort of like drag ourselves through the coals, right? The point is not to throw ourselves upon the mercy of the marginalized for all the bad things we have done to them. It's to say these structures were cruel and unjust, and we can do better, that we can build a better world, that we don't have to, stick to the lie that we told ourselves to make this work. We can say, okay, that was bad. Let's do better. And to me, that does not seem particularly like alarming or challenging, but the very suggestion of that appears to frighten and alarm and threaten a lot of conservatives and a lot of centrists as well, who are attached to sort of a myth of American exceptionalism. But if there's anything the past 4 years have shown us, is that America is not exceptional, and that it is not, free from all of the bad things that we pretend only happen elsewhere. And the best thing that we can do is say, okay, oops, we were wrong. How do we fix it going forward? Alternatively, we could pass a bunch of laws making it illegal to teach this sort of history and pretend like it's not happening. We'll see what happens. Anyway, any more questions for me before I sign off? Thank you all for listening to me ramble about the 1619 Project. Next week or whatever comes next will be about actually history, probably. But you're always going to have, anytime there's fun inside baseball historiographic nonsense, you can come here to hear about it. No, we would not have. I mean, we the Viet Cong were always going to win. However, if Hanoi Jane had not gone over there, we would have won. She sapped the troops' morale. Can you believe that there's still people who are mad at Jane Fonda? People are going to be mad at Jane Fonda for the rest of their lives. Mad at Jill Stein. It's the wildest thing. It's just absolutely just pudding brain. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.